to have the sponsorship of Rogers Sports Media and of our company, which is called Black Biblio, and no K in the black. We have been, they have really enabled us to get this out across the country into most of their, their media outlets. We launched this in 2016 at McGill University's Faculty of Education. Both Dorothy and I are alumni there, but we got support from McGill University and their Faculty of Education for the kit. And we also have support from organizations like the Canadian Education Association, a number of school boards, both in Quebec, Ontario, out west, and as well out in PEI and Nova Scotia. So, we're very encouraged by the fact that people are now gaining, and more of an understanding as to how this information can be used to supplement the curriculum within your schools. Next, please, Joanne. As you can see here, this is Dr. Williams, you see there on the top. And as I said, she's a noted historian, and she does numerous works, and she's sought out by numerous individuals in films, for novels. In fact, the Book of Negroes, if you know that, by Lawrence Hill, she is cited often as in terms of her work that helped articulate some of the issues in that novel and movie.
Every letter of the alphabet is a story of Black Canadian history.
This material should be in all schools across Canada. Yeah. It should be in all libraries across Canada. Blacks have made such great contribution to the development of Canada, but our stories have not been told.
Well, that's what this is about, right here, right now.
All right, this is it. Wow,
this is it.
Again.
This is Black Biblio going national with an incredible national sponsor that's making it possible.
They understood the importance of the message that Black Biblio had been created to share with the rest of the country.
It's going to take a long time to help broaden the narrative of Canada, and it's good to see that Rogers Sports and Media, the All-In program, is really at the forefront of it.
Think you know Canada's story? Think again.
That was our launch of the All-In campaign last year at Emancipation Day at Dundas Square there, where the Rogers Building is, and it was really a spectacular event for us. It was just amazing. But we owe as well a great deal of debt to the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, because she was the one who made sure that this became a part of the recognized activities and recognized important elements of Canadian life and culture, to include Black History Month. In 1996, it was finally adopted by the House, and she was the one that was really responsible for getting it in there. But on that occasion, she talked about what it meant. She said, Black History Month helps us to focus on the history of Canadians of African descent and to recognize historically the Black population in Canada has played an important part in the development of this land, its culture, economy, and its political structure. Black History Month is a time for all Canadians to learn and be aware of the rich and colorful community that has been a part of Canada since 1603, before Canada became a nation. And that's what we like to stress here, that most people believe or think that we're just the new arrivals here, that we've came in the immigration wave of the 1960s, 70s, and right through the early 2000s with with the Caribbean community, and then through to the African community we see more prominent in terms of immigrants these days. But we've actually been here much longer than that, starting with Matthew DaCosta, who was the pilot, the guide, and the interpreter for Samuel de Champlain when he first, crossed the Grand Banks at, in Newfoundland, or we now know as Newfoundland, and then touched down on the continent and claimed it for France and called it Nouvelle-France. Next, please. So almost 30 years after the conception of Black History Month, can you think of, if you told your students to think of two historically important Black Canadians, could they do so? And often I go into schools and I say, look, why don't you just do a little experiment with me? Close your eyes, all right? And for 5 seconds, I want you to think of Canadian hero. So they go close their eyes, I give them 5 seconds. And then I say, now open your eyes, and I ask them, did any of them look like me? And invariably, no. Invariably, they cannot name anyone from a Black or even other, many even Indigenous or other people of color that are Canadian heroes. And we're all about trying to change that. Because history is extremely important, because it's the way in which we tell the story of who we are. It's the way in which we create the narrative, all right, that makes us feel as Canadians. We recognize that people have done some important things, all right, and we value what they've done. And when you do not see yourself reflected in the history of your country, then it means that nobody recognizes that anything that you've done as important, nor do they value what you've done. And as a matter of fact, Dr. Williams, when she was in high school, she asked her teacher, who was teaching Canadian history, how come he didn't include any stories, from the Black community? And he looked at her and said, because you have no history. All right. So instead of it discouraging her, that made her want to prove her teacher wrong. And she started to compile information. She was lucky that she had family members. She's like 5th, 6th generation here on her own, and they had knowledge and stories of the contributions of Blacks, to the country. And she started to pursue that, and then develop other avenues to gain more information. And she really has proven that professor or that teacher wrong. I wish he was still alive so she could show him. Next, please. So in keeping with that, we're going to ask you a little bit of a question, but you're not going to have to respond. But there's a couple of things that we sort of want to show you as to how, the information has not been passed. And when we talk to people about this kit, they always say, how come I didn't know this? How come this was not a part of, of my teachings? So the first one, please, Joanne. What Canadian cabin has links to the American Civil War? Well, many of you may not know that there's an author by the name of Harriet Beecher Stowe. She wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was about a slave who had, defended the slave owner when it was invaded by, I think, the Union Army. And Abraham Lincoln, when he met Ms. Stowe, he said he blamed her for starting his Civil War. But people don't actually know that Uncle Tom, Mr. Josiah Henson, actually escaped slavery and came to Canada, and Uncle Tom's cabin sits in Dresden, Ontario. Next, please. The Canadian connection to the Real Mccoy. Now, some of you may have heard, certainly those people who are of my vintage know the expression, the Real Mccoy. Well, this was because a gentleman by the name of Elijah McCoy, who was a young Black man who was raised here in Canada, went to his primary and secondary school here, but could not get into university, either here in Canada or in the United States, because of the color of his skin. So he went to Scotland, obtained an engineer's degree, all right, and came back and worked on the railroad. And as he worked on the railroads, he invented an automatic, what is called an automatic drip car. To you, it may not sound like much, but before Mr. McCoy, on those on trains when they traveled, they always had to have, they had a brakeman, they had an engineer, a brakeman, and an oilman. And they, at every so often, they would stop. The oilman would get out and go into the engine and pour oil in it in order to keep it from seizing up. Right. Well, he invented the oil drip can that eliminated the need to stop, which sped up travel for both people and for goods, all right, by 8 times. And engineers were so proud to have that within their engine, all right, because it put them above everybody else. When they talked about this oil drip can, they would say, "I've got the Real McCoy." Next, please. Which Black Nova Scotian was one of the first Victoria Cross winners? Now, for those of you who don't know, the Victoria Cross is the highest military honor that can be given by the British Empire to any soldier. And he was one of the, and William Hall, a Black man from Nova Scotia, was one of the first 3 Canadians to receive the award while he was a soldier in the Crimean War. Unfortunately, it was given to him posthumously, but because afterward he won it, he went to another battle and was unfortunately killed. But not many people know that as far back as the Crimean War, Blacks were participating in the military and distinguishing themselves, as obviously Mr. Hall did, you know, in his capacity. Next, please. Which Black fur trader was renowned for his strength and knowledge? Now, I know that most of you, having learned your Canadian history, you did go through a period of learning about the fur traders in the Hudson Bay and maybe the Great West Company as well. They were doing the fur trade and so on. And but people don't know that there was a family of Black men by the name of Bonga. And George Bonga was the eldest, and they were educated in Montreal. They spoke English and French and Ojibwe. Their father was an escaped Haitian slave. Their mother was an Ojibwe woman, and they were renowned for their knowledge of the territories that they served, and that George was reputed to carry on portages upwards of 700 pounds by himself, right, on long portages. And they were also very trustworthy because many times communities, companies, and even law enforcement use them to track down runaway fugitives. And and as a part of the territory that he was involved with, when Thomas Jefferson of the United States, the president of the United States, the 4th president, bought from Napoleon what was called the Louisiana Purchase, all right, part of that was still Nouvelle-France. But where he lived became Minnesota, and he's revered in Minnesota as the first citizen of Minnesota. And, you know, but he's Canadian, and we don't celebrate it. But school kids in Minnesota all know about George Bonga. Next, please. So here are just a few pictures. You see at the top, the left-hand corner is Elijah McCoy. Below him is George Bonga, as I just talked about. The structure that you see behind you is the Uncle Tom's Cabin there in Dresden. And William Hall was finally recognized with a Canadian stamp that was issued, I believe, in the 2000s. And that's a portrayal of who he was in his, you know, with his Victoria Cross medal, plus some other heroic, you know, medals as well. Next, please. Within the package of what we are going to, and we'll be talking more about what's in the kit, you'll also receive a poster, which is a timeline, which shows, for our purposes, from in our kit, it starts for us in 1628 with the arrival of the first slave in Canada. which was a young boy by the name of Olivier Lejeune, who at 10 years old was an enslaved African boy from Madagascar. He was sold by the Kirk brothers, who were privateers from France, to the Couillard family in Quebec, in Port Royal, which we now know as Quebec City. And so we start there with him being the first Black student, the first slave, and the first Black student in Quebec and in Canada. And we go right through to the 1980s, when, with the retirement of a gentleman by the name of E. Melville Deporte, who was a professor at McGill University for 70 years. It's one of the longest tenured professors in the history of Canada. And he actually created the entomology department there, and entomology and parasitology. And today, fully 50% of entomologists and parasitologists who are working in Canada were trained by him. As a matter of fact, the Canadian government has recognized him as a Canadian of historical significance, because they also lent him out to the European collective there to structure their own system of entomology and parasitology. And people don't know about the extraordinary contributions of this gentleman. Next, please. So here in the kits, we have also cards. And the cards feature a little ditty or a little poem on the front, along with the picture. And then on the back of the card is an explanation of who this person was, who this person, place, or event was, and why we think they were significant. And we've color-coded all of the categories. And for the military one, it happens to be green. Next, please. Now here is George Bonga. This is a first look as well at the inside of the teacher's text that we'll talk about a little bit more. But that's how the page looks on the left-hand side when you open up the book. And what you see reflected on the back of that card is exactly the text that you see under Mr. Bonga's picture. As well, at the bottom for teachers, there is a thing called keywords and terms, which actually help you be able to tell the story when you can look them up, or you get your students to look them up, and you can use them for discussion and more, and to explore more. Next, please, Joanne. Here's another card. This is what we call the geography, or geography or place, where we talk about a specific place, Uncle Tom's Cabin. In this case, there's one called about the Elgin Settlement as well, which was a place where Blacks came to once they escaped the United States, and where they settled down and could be homeowners, own their own businesses, go to school, those kind of things. But this one is blue, and it's for Uncle Tom's Cabin. Next, please. There's a gentleman I referred to before as the Real Mccoy. And this kind of card is a little different. This kind of card, the previous cards that you've seen belong to the set, to the pack, to the kit itself. This card that you're seeing here is a part of what we call the collector's edition. And it really is more like a baseball card or a hockey card that, like I played with in my youth. It gives you the date of birth and death, talks about what their profession was, where they did it, and when they entered Canada, and so on. And then a little explanation of who they are. But always there's a little ditty on the front to be able to use as a mnemonic to help people remember who these individuals were and what they did. Next, please. This is an overview of what the kit will look like, and we'll get into it some more, but you can see the variety of cards there and the two texts, which I'll explain a little bit more about. The teacher's text really is a toolkit along with 26 different lessons, one for each letter. There are two decks of 26 cards that match the teaching, the text context, as we saw with the example of, George Bonga, how we had the paragraph underneath his picture match what's on the back of the card. And teachers can integrate and use them at the same time as they're teaching the lessons. The teacher's guide, as you can see on the right, that has the woman's picture on it, this is full of supplemental information. First of all, there's a glossary of terms, so that teachers get to know and learn what are the elements that come out of the stories that we're telling. So you can learn about what blackface is and what manumission and so on. It gives teachers a proper way to be able to explain this information. Then we have 8 reproducible activity sheets, which comprise a bingo game that you use in connection with the cards. There are activity sheets where you match. There's some, you match the person with the profession or with the place that they came from, where they were born or their activity took place. As well, we have other kinds of crosswords that are both level 1 and level 2 crosswords, and I know you teachers will know what that means. As well as we have one that we always like the teachers in the administration to try, is one that's on discrimination, and see if you can figure out what they are. There's a word search in there as well, but eventually all of the answers are provided in the teacher's guide. And then finally, when the kit is purchased, people get access to an online game. And that online game is really a memory matching game where we have a board that has a number of numbers, say from 1 to 24. You turn over number 1 and you turn over number 13. And if they match, then up will come and match in terms of a figure from our collection. And historical information about them, or maybe some other context around who they were, will also come up. And then when all of the numbers are matched, what will be revealed is another historical event, or person, place, or event, and it's always constantly changing. So you can't play the same game twice while you're using the kit. Next, please. So as you can see, we have 26 lessons in 7 different categories. The purple is arts and science, brown is politics, green is military, blue are places, like I talked, geography, yellow are pioneers, orange is human rights, and red is sports. Next, please. And so here you can see the 2 differences, the text, which is on the left-hand side, and the guide, which is on the right. On the left-hand picture is Mr. Johnson, who was the first Black lawyer in Canada. And on our right is Ms. Rose Fortune, one of my favorite characters. She was actually recognized by the RCMP as Canada's first police woman. And most of us would think that must have been around the 60s or the 70s that our first police woman was happening, because before, I know when I grew up, there were no police women. But actually, she she patrolled the wharf in Annapolis Valley in the late 1800s, right? And way before her time. And she was an extraordinary individual. And not only was our first policewoman, she started one of the first Black-owned businesses, and actually Canadian family-owned businesses. And it lasted through until the 1980s, and rivaled Molson's as one of the longest-running family-owned businesses in the country. Next, please. So here you can see, again, an example of George Bonga. And this is what the teacher looks at. In the teacher's text, no matter where you open it to, bam, right in front of you is your lesson plan. So you have the ditty, which your kids may have, their students will have on their cards. You have the explanation of what they are. There's key terms. And then the right-hand side of the page is a comprehension page. You know, you can ask certain questions at certain levels as to, you know, what the kids understood about the story. But as well, there's Explore More, where you can actually go online and find out additional information about these individuals, about the time, about the context in which they, you know, they appeared. Next, please. Again, we see one about Harriet Tubman. I just want to say one thing about Harriet Tubman. You know, as a matter of fact, often I heard as a young Black man growing up, that everybody was always asking me, well, you know, it's better here in Canada, versus the United States, because I'm originally an American. And most people identify this role or this understanding or this feeling that we have that we're not as bad as the United States because of Harriet Tubman, because of the fact that, you know, she was the conductor, as you will, of the Underground Railroad, and she brought the fugitive slaves to Canada. She brought over 300 herself, over 19 trips back and forth across the border while she was on sort of America's Most Wanted list. But one of the major things is as well that St. Catharines, Ontario is where she you know, operated from. And it's extraordinary that also at that time, the people of St. Catharines, Ontario, they provided food for the fugitive slaves. They provided homes for them. They found jobs for them. They educated their children. As you know, and maybe you don't, but slaves were not allowed to learn to read back in the day, because, you know, slave owners were afraid that if they learned to read and got educated, they would revolt against them and they would lose their livelihoods. Next, please. And this is the teacher's guide here, all right? And like I said, there's a glossary of terms in there so that you can, you know, you can be familiar with some of the language that's going to be coming out within the text. There's advanced questions and things to ponder. So there, you know, and it's an answer key. So you can find answers to many of the things that, you know, of the issues that were brought up in the teacher's text. As well, next, please. We have things like, you know, games like the Black History Olympics, which you play with the cards, all right, as a means of doing it. And of course, the Olympics are on everybody's mind these days. In Canada last night, ladies, you know, ladies did us proud in the hockey. And you can use them for other types of things. We tested this out with kids in a summer camp. And these were actually invented by the counselors themselves, who started to creatively use the cards to, you know, to capture the attention of their young campers. And so we instituted it into the guide so that, you know, you teachers as well can bring it into your classrooms and create these like kinetic cues, ones where people get a chance to move around and it keeps them excited. And of course, as you know, students, you know, usually love games of some sort. Next, please. So here again are the activity sheets, and the bingo sheet on the right. Actually, you play with the cards as well. So in the square is a description of a character. And what you have to do is you have to go around. You're going to have a card. Each one of your students will have one of the cards. And you're going to have to go around and talk to people and find out who exactly was you know, one of the first recipients of the Victoria Cross, and who, you know, and who was this and who was that. So, you know, and you use your cards to do that. Then, of course, we talked about the, you know, the matching games, which you see here on the left, which is the people who are connected to, in this case, their profession, but we also have in terms of where they were from. Next, please. And finally, this is the example of the online game. And as you can see, you turn over one of the numbers, you pick a number, it turns over, it gives you a character. If you pick another number and it matches, up will come a historical lesson, a little 30-second vignette, if you will, about the character or about something that was happening in Canada at the time or during their time. And you have to clear the whole board, but if you don't get them, you have to turn back over to the next person, and the next person gets to guess, and so on. So the first one to clear the board, is the winner. Next, please. I just wanted to lastly underline that we really created these kits because we had been missing this information back in our day. And I also wanted my kids to grow up with an understanding of who they were and that they were valued, and that our community actually contributed to the development of Canada. When I was growing up, kids would say to you, well, look, hey, the Italians did this, and the Greeks did that, they brought democracy, and the Jews did this, et cetera, et cetera. What did the Black community do? And the only thing that we knew about the history of Black people is that we've been slaves. And that's not, that's not a legacy to build on. In our community, we talk about, if I can see it, I can be it. The trouble is that we're not getting presented with people to see, all right, in order to be able to emulate. And sometimes it's one of those factors that induce an ill perception of education and institutional education on the part of our community, because they don't see themselves as a part of it. So we're hoping that people would begin to use this in a way in which they can explore the many significant contributions of the Black community to what we know as Canada today. Next, please. Right now, during Black History Month, there's a $50 off price for if you purchase it. And again, I remind you that you'll get the online game that goes along with it, and all you have to do is go to blackbiblio.com, all right, or contact the lovely Joanne, who introduced me here in the beginning, and she can help you find your way through whatever it is that you want to be able to purchase. Next, please. And this is a part of this year's campaign with Rogers Sports and Media. We're talking about not erasing our history, because so much of it has been, and we're hopeful that people are going to take up the mantle and insist that Black history be taught throughout their curriculums, because it's not just Black history, it's Canadian history. Next, please. All right. Finally, in the back of the teacher's guide is an interpretation of what your educational plan for the province is, what it requires you to teach. And we show you that by using certain examples within our kit, it corresponds to what you're being required to teach. So like I said, whether it's liberal arts or cross-cultural competencies or political and physical regions of Canada, whatever it is, all right, that information, there's something about that within our text, and not to interfere with the curriculum, but as a way of supplementing people's understanding, that we were there right alongside these people, and we were achieving things at the same time. So next. So just want to thank you very much and for listening to the presentation. And if you have any question, I'd be delighted to to answer them. All right. So,
and I'm back.
So
and I'm your Ontario connection.
So it seems that I've done a good job. If nobody has any questions, yeah, you all know the answers now, and but please, we encourage you. And one other thing, and maybe this more for Shireen, but everybody else, you can encourage people that you may know, all right, to buy a kit for their school, all right? If they're alumni or anything like that, they might be interested in donating a copy to your school library so that everybody can have, access to it. So we encourage people to do that too when they come and visit our website, and hopefully it sparks some interest and gives people a little bit more, gives people a way in which they can also, contribute to, all right, creating a much more open